there's always a period where people pop in.
Good. Yeah.
And I also have to promote Robert to a co-host. All righty, welcome everybody. Just find a seat, so to speak. Okay, there's Robert. Move to panelist. All right, Robert. And great. Okay, so Robert is the co-host. So I guess I'll just get started. I'll wait a couple more minutes. It's like 30 seconds or so.
Hey.
Hey, there's Robert.
How are you?
I'm good. How are you doing?
Good, thank you.
See, I told you there's a literal computer lab behind him. I wasn't lying to you.
Yeah, there's people.
But
there's
I don't
people
see the people, but
they're there.
They're here.
They're there. Good.
We have a person standing here. Can we get a person?
Just for scale. There we go.
So over here, yeah.
Good. They're there.
All right. So I'm gonna kick it off. Welcome everybody to the fifth. This is the fifth talk in the 2022 Sara Turnbull Visiting Designer Lecture Series, where we've been talking to a whole wide range of people, experts in the world of music, sound, art, philosophy, activism, and guess what? Today we actually speak to a designer. So this is going to be, it really brings it full circle. And we're still going around. I'm Dave Schwittig. I'm assistant professor of graphic design and digital media at Lehman College. With me today is my colleague, Professor Robert Würzburg. He works to restore forestry and wildlife habitats, and he's also a children's media creator and animator, among many other things. I'm finding out. He's going to be joining us today in discussion with our guest. Robert's also just teaching, for those of you who don't know, he's teaching a course in climate design which is the class he's sitting in right now, which has paired science students with art students to come up with a sort of holistic installation design that bridges this gap between science and art, this artificial gap. And this lecture series is basically a component of that class. As always, if you have questions during the talk, feel free to use the Q&A function down at the very bottom, and I will do my best to keep an eye on it. Although I will tell you, Christina, we have tons of questions for you already. So I don't know how much attention I can pay to this Q&A, but it's there in case something exciting pops up. Robert and I are really excited to welcome our guest today, Christina Rüegg Grässli. She's an award-winning creative director and designer with over 25 years of experience in the design field. She's a creative director at the Stockholm-based studio, The New Division, Agents of Sustainability, which is a consultancy striving to accelerate the transformation to a sustainable future. So she's like right in the pocket of who we need to speak to. Christina was the lead designer on the design system for 17 global goals, which is the UN Sustainable Development Goals, which she's going to talk about today, and the 169 targets. As a multidisciplinary creative, she is comfortable working at the intersection of design, branding, and experience. She aims for simple, considered, compelling, and emotive solutions to solve complex challenges. And I met her in graduate school, so that's another fun fact, years ago. Christina, welcome. Thank you so much for meeting with us today. Really appreciate it.
Thank you for having me.
Of course.
Yeah, very exciting lecture series you have going.
Yes, it's crazy. It's been crazy.
Oh.
Which is what we want.
Should we start? Should I?
Yeah.
Dive in?
Yes, dive in. Show us what you got.
Okay.
And just while you're doing that, Jose's reminding me that it's Holly. So happy Holly, everybody, to those who celebrate, and even those who don't.
Okay, now I hope this works now.
Yeah.
Wait. Okay. So now you can see it.
Yes, looks great.
Okay, designing for climate awareness, or maybe more fitting for this talk, my journey to working with arts and design for sustainable and climate engaged communication. So my background, I grew up in Switzerland not right up here, but close to nature. For those who don't know, Switzerland is a small country in the center of Europe. I grew up with 2 older brothers, so I learned to assert myself at an early age. My father was a high school teacher and my mother a women's dressmaker. My mother was and still is a very creative person, so I guess this was laid in my cradle somewhat. To my parents, it was really important that we could follow our dreams and learn the profession we were aspiring. I always had their support in everything I did, and I guess this made me who I am today. So the basics, the rules and how to break them. Switzerland is known for its chocolate, cheese, but also for the typographic grid system. This is a book by Josef Müller-Brockmann. He was a pioneer of the grid system and what people call Swiss design. It's a simple design, clean use of typography, shapes and colors, and it inspires many graphic designers. And this is what I was taught when I was in college to study graphic design. I always loved typography and designing with type. But what really excited me about this was when I learned how to break these rules of typography to make it more expressive. So this is Raygun magazine, and this is done by David Carson. He was known for this particular aesthetics, which is also called grunge typography. And David Carson was kind of the godfather of grunge in the visual world, you could say. So as you can see, this was very inspiring to me, to some of the work I did in college, like this poster for a classical opera, Die Zauberflöte by Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart. Here I tried to capture the drama of the storyline with just using typography. This was actually part of a poster series with the intention to bring opera closer to younger people. And this here is an exploration of a mark for a specific jazz festival in Willisau, which is a town in Switzerland. Through the deconstruction of the W, I wanted to bring the jazz music into this mark. And maybe interesting to know that these kind of things were done all by hand back then without any computers. So I studied design, but I was also trained in classical singing from a young age on. The most rewarding part about singing was when I had a concert and people came up to me afterwards and told me how moved they were by my voice. So I was interested in bringing design and music together and finding a common essence, which for me was also a connection on an emotional level. Finding a way of expression to trigger an emotion or a reaction. Chapter 3, in motion. On this journey, I started working at a motion design company in Zurich because this to me seemed to be the most obvious way to connect design and music. And I also thought it was super exciting to work in this field and to take the design a step further through adding animation. It was a time where I also explored a lot of different things. I started creating visuals on the side, which were played at parties in underground clubs in Zurich. That was just a cool thing to do back then. So back then we worked with digibeta tapes to in or output video material. This visual effect you see is actually what you get when you fast forward or rewind a tape. I thought this effect, which looks like an imperfection, is a cool thing to work with and use. So I recorded the fast forwarding and the rewinding onto another tape and then read it back into the Softimage DS. That was the tool we used to work with to edit and do simple animation. And then edited the piece together to create rhythm and movement. I was interested to create this visual, which could also be seen as a rhythmic light source when played at a dance party. This is another piece from that area. So this piece was created for the Eddy Award in 2000. Eddy is an award show which honors the best Swiss contract and commercial films. The one in 2000 was actually the first one ever held. The piece was played on about 40 TV screens, which were hanging from the ceiling in a circular formation and served as an installation during the event. It was a 20-minute long animation, which I created with 2 co-workers and friends from back then. And this is actually a really bad resolution photo from that event where you see the TV screens hanging. It looks like it's 100 years old, the photo, but it's actually not. So this was really fun for a while. But then I was 27 at the time and I wanted to experience new things and see the world. So I moved to New York and joined the master's program in design and technology, where I met Dave. There, I started to focus in more on my 2 main passions, design and music. I got really interested in the visualization of music, specifically synesthesia. Synesthesia is a neurological condition in which stimulation of one sensory or cognitive pathway, for example, hearing, leads to automatic involuntary experiences in a second sensory cognitive pathway, such as vision. So simply put, when one sense is activated, another unrelated sense is activated at the same time. This may, for instance, take the form of hearing music and simultaneously sensing the sound as swirls or patterns of color. It is estimated that approximately 3 to 5% of the population has some form of synesthesia, and the women are apparently more likely to become synesthetes than men. This phenomenon was just really fascinating to me, how one could hear a song and connect it to a color or a visual. I wanted to explore this sensation. When I hear a song, what colors do I see or what images would I see? This ended up becoming quite a big focus in these following 2 years. So one of the projects created was La Jeune Fille, where I tried to visualize the song in how I would see it. How can I visualize, portray these emotions this song releases? So I took the song Air de Clochette. It's from an opera by Léo Delip and sung by Nathalie Dessay, who's an amazing soprano. Of course, this song already is so emotional and moving, but as designers, how can we visualize the non-visual and oralize the non-oral? And how does it relate to what we as designers do? To communicate and raise awareness for issues, we need to connect to the viewer. We connect through information and communication using words and visuals. In visual communication, colors, imagery, style, all work together to convey meaning on multiple levels for the brain and the heart, to influence the messaging. People need to understand and feel in order to care. If they don't, they won't act. That's why all action is emotional. After graduation, I started working at Throwback Company, a renowned motion design and branding company in New York. We worked a lot on a lot of TV networks rebrands. This was a board for Time Warner Cable, which was actually never produced. But we also worked on quite a few different conference branding projects like this one, the opening titles for Promax BDA in 2011. Promax is a global association for the entertainment marketing industry. It holds an annual award show, the Promax Awards, what this was for. For this piece, we used light as an energetic metaphor for ideas, time, and space. We observed how ideas can quickly grow and replicate themselves and how the viral nature of communication affects us. We used different light sources, which we filmed in camera while moving them. We had a script, a little choreography, and then added the long-term exposure effect in post-production. Another opening sequence we did was for the PopTech conference. PopTech is an annually held conference in Camden, Maine. It is a meeting of great people and minds who have an ongoing dialogue about science, technology, and future ideas. I created this project together with Stina Smith while at Throwback, and Stina is a talented designer, now creative director and good friend of mine. For this, we used flowing ink, ferrofluid, smoke, as well as other organic materials to visualize the theme of the year's conference, scarcity and abundance. And we actually did get a lot of recognition for this piece, and it also brought us some awards. So to loop back to design and music, I also wanted to show you this piece we created for a showing at the TED conference in 2007, which Jacob Throwback presented. The idea was to create a music video which was not reactive, but rather wanted to have the music be the voice and have the animation following it. For this, we took a track by David Byrne and Brian Eno called Moonlight in Glory.
Before God destroyed people on the earth,
So me and Tolga, another designer from Throwback, worked on this project. We divided the piece up so each of us would had some of the rhythms, sounds, and voices to work with. There was also a lot of dialogue and checking in with each other to make sure the piece would feel as a whole one. The rhythmic elements were easier to capture than the voices. It was challenging to find the right visual tonality for the different voices to portray their characteristics in the song. But I think in the end, it turned out to be an interesting piece. Sorry for the harsh transition.
I think I just want to pause. Like, if I could stop and clap, we would all be doing it. I mean, I'm already blown away. So please continue.
Thank you. Okay, so even though I really loved my job and the work we did at Throwback, besides those projects I just showed before, we also did a lot of commercial projects. And I oftentimes felt that I was missing a sense for a deeper meaning in what I was doing. By that, I mean something that can have a bigger impact, something that really matters. So what really shifted my focus was when the UN released their sustainability goals for 2030. The road to dignity by 2030, ending poverty, transforming all lives, and protecting the planet. At that point, I already have moved back again to Switzerland, but I was still working together with Throwback Company. So the backstory is, when the project was initiated in 2014, Richard Curtis, the tremendous screenwriter and filmmaker, walked into Jacob Throwback's office and said, I quote, "The SDGs are coming, 17 goals, and the only way they can succeed is if we can make them popular. Can you help me with that?" Of course, Jacob agreed and brought me on board to work on this really exciting and important project. So this is taken out from the original UN document, which was about 47-page long document. There was so much information in this document, which the majority of people would never read nor potentially understand. So it was clear that we needed to create a simple language that everyone could understand. So, for example, Goal 15, protect, restore, and promote sustainable use of terrestrial ecosystems, sustainably manage forests, combat desertification and halt and reverse land degradation, and halt biodiversity loss. So we simply made life on land. We created a visual language to go with the words so people could really use it as a system. These were some initial sketches. And this is the system we ended up with. We decided that it would make sense for each goal to have its own color, which was actually a bit of a challenge to create a color palette of 17 colors, which would work harmoniously together. But I think we were pretty successful with that.
Yeah, you did it.
So, and then obviously there was also need for a main symbol. And this is an early sketch where we looked at including the 17 goals into one symbol. And here you can see the goals making up the globe. And this also became pretty much based on the sketch, the actual logo. So the 17 goals tell us what we must care about, but they do not explain what we must do. The goals are actually categories. The 169 targets are the real goals. So we went through the same process with the 169 targets and ended up with the new periodic table. We created an icon for each of the 169 targets and also made the words easier to understand. Then we also created the target finder, which is the ultimate guide to all the goals and targets.
Is it a coincidence that it looks like the Pantone?
It might have been inspired by the Pantone wheel I have on my desk.
Just wondering.
Well, you cannot always invent the wheel.
No, you shouldn't.
Scratch.
You shouldn't.
Reuse and recycle. So creating the iconic language for the 17 goals for the UN was the foundation for the start of the new division, a Stockholm-based agency, which was founded in 2017 by Jacob Throwback and Hannah Bowman. Of course, I wanted to join this crew and was part of the team from the beginning. Even though I'm working from Switzerland and TND is based in Sweden, but in this digital world we live in these days, it works actually pretty well. As of now, we've grown into a company of 15 people working in sustainability strategy, communication, and design. We are constantly striving to accelerate the transformation to a sustainable and inclusive future. And this is also reflected in all the work and projects we do. And the most important thing, we're all very passionate about our work. So last year, the New York Times created one of the largest side events of COP26 in Glasgow. During 9 days, the conference featured renowned speakers, ambitious panels, discussions, and in the end turned into an important climate conference and meeting place. I will take you through the case study of the New York Times Climate Hub project, which was probably also the most exciting project I worked on last year. So this is just a tiny excerpt of the brief we got from the New York Times to develop a distinctive and memorable graphic and motion identity for the New York Times Climate Hub at COP26. The identity will create a visually cohesive presence for the 10 days of the Glasgow talks and experience, the website and all the related touch points. So these were the keywords we started working with. Dynamic, it needed to be able to hold up on an experiential live event. It needed to live in motion as well. Hopeful, climate design needs to be hopeful. We need to be able to see opportunities. Only that will inspire us to action. Powerful, it wants to be powerful and bold to be memorable. Authoritative, it needs to be able to live alongside authoritative journalism. And inspirational, it wants to be inspirational and provoke imagination instead of closing it off. Something we were inspired by from the beginning on were heat and radar maps. We drew inspiration from its colors, complexity, and its constant changing system. This was a first iteration of what ended up being the final logotype. We were interested in these layered shapes, which form a vibrant system in motion. It would allow individual topics to be in focus, but would also exist in a system that highlights the complexity of our challenges. Also in this initial process, we created this system where we put the colors in a context. So the greens, the ecosystem earth, the blues, the ecosystem water, both threatened ecosystems by the warming planet, the heat, which is a result of activity by society, which then leads to ideas and solutions and actions. We also created a color map to anchor the system as a visual ecosystem and assigned the colors to the different themes of the conference. Energy and storage, food and agriculture, construction and design, transport and mobility, and food, what do we not have? Water and oceans. It's hidden behind the bar on the bottom. We started combining the different colors, trying to find a solution to combine all 5 conference themes into one main logotype. And this is what ended into this final iteration. The logotype symbolizes the different themes at the conference event. We also wanted the logotype to portray the complexity of sustainability, both the lightness and darkness, while being organic, moving, and breathing to provoke your imagination. The animation should feel like a breathing organism where you could get lost in this universe of color. The assignment then grew to event design, wayfinding, promotional trailer, exhibition extension, and editorial film. So this was the branding and wayfinding system. We wanted to portray the organic nature of the Climate Hub and speak to both halves of the brain, the scientific and logical reasoning, along with the imaginative and emotional side. To bring the identity closer to the industrial nature of the location the event was taking place at, we created the concept of wild posting. We also created these facts posters, which extended the system. The facts were either opportunities or challenges, which were related to the different conference themes. And of course, a website was part of the package, which was done by our friends Code and Conspire. Then artist S. Devlin was brought into the project to create an immersive experience in the main room of the Climate Hub, giving attendees a space for reflection and creative thought on climate change. The installation Conference of the Trees, a temporary Scottish native forest, was made up of 197 trees and plants, representing the 197 countries that have agreed on the United Nations Framework Convention on Climate Change. After the closing of the Climate Hub, the trees and plants were planted nearby as a native public garden. And this was during the setting up. The screen design is an extension of the identity and branding. It is anchored with a strong type-driven system paired with vast color nuances of the logo. We created a flexible toolkit for the 2 main stages and screens, and the 20 standing screens that were placed throughout the venue. Further, we created 3 different films for the Climate Hub in order to support and extend the identity: a trailer, journalism film, and an extension to the forest art installation in the main space. For the journalism film, we wanted to remind the viewer that we have the solutions at hand. We just need to rethink our way of living on this planet. We developed a concept of an untouched new world to open up the viewer's imagination and the possibilities we have to build better systems. So, reconnecting back to the beginning of my journey. So now I can use my skills to motivate people to take action. With design, we have the ability to shine a light on and raise awareness for specific issues. We can foster communication around important topics, and we can help to make complex information more accessible. We can help to engage action and hope and show off opportunities. Thank you.
Wow. Thank you, Christina. I'm a little bit speechless. Luckily, I've written stuff down so I can just read it. But I mean, this was incredible. Just a couple questions, and I know you may not be able to answer this, but if you could guess, like, what was the New York Times and well, the budget for the Climate Hub rebranding? If you had to throw out a number, I'm just like, I'm just wondering. Make something up.
This is see, I'm the designer. I never know about the money.
You don't touch that stuff. No,
I don't touch that topic.
It could be in euros, but we're talking like a lot of money, right? I mean, it's got to be. It's a good amount of money, and it's interesting. Like you showed that one shot of the whole the actual conference area where people are sitting, and it's like in the forest, right? I mean, that alone must have cost a small fortune. But I think it's incredible. And you and I were talking about this actually earlier before we went live, but you were saying that actually you might have said it in your presentation that people need to see themselves in the thing that they're looking at in order to connect. And I think that's really key. That's something that's one of the reasons that Robert and I wanted to do this, was that if you're reading like if you just look at like the UN climate reports, or you look at like any kind of scientific journals or white papers on the subject, it's difficult to see yourself in it because it's very heavy on data. It's written in often in language that most people don't understand, but everybody understands stories, and they understand seeing themselves when they see themselves in a story. And I think the forest conference seating was a brilliant stroke, because you literally you yourself are in the space, right? I was wondering if you could talk a little bit about that in your work. Like, how are you sort of like consciously doing this, where you're trying to tell a story and you're trying to like get people to see themselves reflected in the work, or does it just sort of organically happen? Like, how do you approach that?
Well, I think, I mean, it always depends also on the project. I think it's for, some projects it's kind of easier to bring in sort of a storyline or emotion. But then, some projects are more about really, kind of make people understand the information,
Yeah. But this is one of the things we're trying to do right now in the class, is each thing that we're thinking about creating, that we're sort of brainstorming right now, but in each thing we're trying to sort of have a little bit of a narrative, like a little bit of a story. Like, for example, when you showed us the logo, the Climate Hub logo in pieces, right? Separate, it's a system of things, right? And you can see them all in pieces, and it's when they come together and in that logo where like there's a story being told. It's a very abstracted story in some ways, and then when it starts moving, right, and undulating, that's a story too, right? Stories can be like really sort of abstract and not grounded in reality, and they still have an impact. And I think actually that other piece you showed us, it was over the music, the David Bowie, Brian Eno song, which I love that song, by the way. But it was I love that piece. But even that kind of had a story, and it's how the syncing to the music helped tell the story. The little bits that may have been out of sync, or that frustrated the syncing, right? In some ways, like when the lyrics were coming at you, and sometimes they would flash, but other times they would kind of come from the depth and just sort of appear. That is a story too, right? So there's like all these different ways to tell a story that I think I think your talk kind of is helping me at least crystallize that and how to think about that.
Yeah.
Go for it, Robert.
No,
I was. What were you gonna say?
Well, I was kind of the whole wayfinding issue. I
Yeah.
thought it was fascinating when that came up, and I started thinking about, well, where did that fall in your process? And so somehow you need to have the material before you can create a wayfinder, and on the other hand, the wayfinder is almost an accidental process as well. It's something you have to kind of fall into. So can you talk about the developing the whole wayfinder? Like where did that fit in? Was that something you're tracking the whole time? And because what's one thing we're doing, we're pulling all this material together constantly, and in the one hand we're in a free fall with information, and we can't get hung up on whether we can hanging on to one piece or another. We have to kind of let everything sort of spill out, and then find our way on that material once it reveals itself. And I'm just wondering if there's, like, in your process, where did that fit in?
The wayfinding, you mean?
Yeah.
Well, I mean, first, the first thing is always kind of the developing the identity, the language, the system, that's including also colors and type and just the whole sort of idea behind it. And then the wayfinding and all the sort of venue branding was actually in a third phase. So the first phase was actually the identity development, and then the second phase was the kind of advertisement, like the ads and the website and all of that. And then the third phase was the actual venue branding. How do we sort of welcome the people? How do we connect this identity to this event, and how do we also guide them through it? So it was kind of like this mix between, I mean, what it ended up being, this sort of this is the information, and then we also have sort of this touching on the story, provoking thoughts and emotions, and sort of bringing this together.
I have a question about that too, and it's from one of the attendees. But I'm interested. How do you research your audience to better connect with them, and how do you prioritize between the audiences that will witness your work? And I guess my added question to that is, who is the audience for the Climate Hub specifically? Was there an audience or a demographic, and what kind of research did you do on them?
I mean, it was it was a lot of, I think it was a very diverse mix of people. So that's always kind of hard to grasp in a way.
Yeah,
but,
yeah.
I think in the end, you kind of need to find just a way also how to talk about this topic and how to sort of communicate this. And so I think the audience was pretty broad, really.
Yeah, it's almost like it's impossible. I mean, it's a similar question that we face right now in our class, in this climate design class, but really anyone trying to affect change with the climate crisis and environmental issues has the same challenge, which is that the audience is pretty much everybody, which if you work in entertainment, that's not really an audience, right? So it's like, it's a really interesting question. It's how do you reach just a human? How do you just reach a human? And it's like, it's impossible to reach all humans, unfortunately, But
I think, that's why I think the identity also wanted to be something kind of, in a way, open, like not like very, not like a sort of a specific kind of thing, but really trying to sort of be emotional or inspiring.
Yeah, it really does, I think, resonate. It like rhymes, that work, with what you've been doing. I think if we like look back in your career, like you've already been trying to have an emotional vein that's accessible to many people, and kind of conveys a lot of different things, not just movement, but also like sound and tonality and like harmony and all that stuff. It's kind of all there, and you kind of it's sort of encapsulated in that Climate Hub work. So I applaud you for that. I think that's incredible. I mean, will we be lucky in this class to even reach anything at that level? So I just want to put it that way. Another thing is that a challenge we're having is that at this point, you kind of like started with the brief, right? You had the Climate Hub brief essentially. We are at the moment somewhat briefless, right? We as a class, like we kind of have an idea of what we're doing, but we haven't. Robert, I might be wrong about this, but is there like a document or a paragraph that really nails down what we're trying to do at this point? Like what would, I guess this is a question for Robert too. Like, what do you think about that?
Well, I think we're sort of on the verge of that, because I think we're getting to the point now where there's some structure that's starting to form. And we didn't want to put the structure before. And I think I'm listening to what your process is a little bit, and I'm thinking there's some similarity to what we were doing, in the sense that, as I said before, we're sort of digesting a huge amount of material, from ethical questions to, data questions to science to, just kind of developing awareness on a certain level of kind of all the facets of the climate, just the climate itself, or the bios itself, and then kind of in the process also digesting sort of side effects of climate change and so on, or the effects of climate change. And so putting a structure up before we had all that really was kind of like already coming to a conclusion before we knew what we were really looking for. So we're at that. We're rapidly approaching that right now. And, it seems very appropriate, timely in a way.
Yeah. Christina, you had something to say about that?
I guess I was just going to say that, I think if you basically have the story you want to tell, then it kind of just sort of goes from there. You know what I mean?
Yeah. I think that's where it's at. Like we've had people come and talk to us. We've been telling our own stories, and I think we're hitting on things. And I think Robert's exactly right. Like we're now just sort of coming up behind it and hitting on what could be a brief. And briefs are great because they can change over time, but they're living documents in some ways. But I don't think we should have a sort of static, frozen, sort of prescribed thing about what we're doing. So I think that's like it's ultimately a good thing. I have a question. You referenced David Carson, whom I love, by the way, at Raygun. I mean, Raygun was like one of the reasons I wanted to be a designer. This is the 90s, people.
Yeah. We're older than all of you.
Yeah, we're older than everybody. But Chris Allsworth is another person who worked for Raygun and did a lot of like their typographic stuff. And if you look at like a Raygun magazine now, I think it still holds up, but it was of like an era, right? And you hit it on the head. It was like late 90s grunge.
Yeah.
And it's an aesthetic, right? It's its own aesthetic. All of its, I mean, no other publication had anything close to that, that sort of creative energy. And I'm wondering from you, you showed us a lot of like very slick, like clean, motion graphics pieces and design pieces. And there's like the grunge over here on one end of the spectrum, like the sort of ripped up and broken trash aesthetic almost. And then on the other side, there's this very clean, high gloss, techno driven sort of aesthetic. And then with the Climate Hub, it's this very dreamy, almost like living orb of energy, like an aura type thing, which I think is again on this more high gloss or abstracted end of the spectrum. I feel like where we're headed as a class is more on the trashy edge. Like we've been collecting garbage, we've been collecting e-waste as a class, and we're now ready to put it together. Where do you fall in terms of like the aesthetic language for communicating things about climate change? What do you think, in your experience, works better? I don't know if maybe it's about better or worse, but what is your taste, I guess, is what I'm asking. If you were to see something in a space.
Yeah, I mean, personally, I always am attracted to things which move me. I mean,
Okay.
that's always been like that, like in art. Like when I was 20, I had no idea what I should think about art, and I didn't really understand what art is or whatever. But then I just sort of had this sort of epiphany that, you know, I went into the museum and I saw some pieces which really moved me. And from there, it was just, I was like, oh, this is, you know, I like this because it's moving me in whatever way, it's touching me. And I think, you know, in a way with design in general or climate design, I think that's one point. But then, of course, it also needs to be informative. Like, you know, you need to sort of tell the truth. You need to, it needs to be based on facts. So I think it's like, you know, both in a way.
That's,
and then, you know, depending on the project, like it's sometimes more of that or more of this, you know.
I had a question about when you're designing for an audience that's basically on board already, right? So you've got an audience at the conference, for example. You had everybody was there with a purpose. Everybody, you know, was on board already. So in a way, it's a remarkably successful. What you guys did was really remarkably successful in communicating, in a way, a common language amongst all the attendees, and or most of them, I guess. Sure, there were some spies in them amongst the mix, but I think the challenge that we're facing now, I mean, not in the classroom, but in generally speaking, is one which is kind of reaching an audience or a population and bringing a population on board with a common purpose. That's a lot of whom are, you know, they're not necessarily not just not on board with the agenda, but they don't even understand the agenda. Like their value systems or their assumptions are just completely divorced in some level from a lot of the issues that need to be addressed right now. And you know, it's really highlighted now with the situation, I think, in the Ukraine, where you've got essentially this petrochemical state that's kind of diverting everyone's attention from something that's way more important. And, you know, in a way where we should all be sort of in some state of transition at this point. And yet, a large part of the population isn't even thinking about that now. And how do you, you know, see? Do you see any? Is part of your discussion about trying to figure out, you know, kind of like some kind of larger objective? This seemed what you did for the conference seems pretty darn close, but there's also this thing was like, how do you reach everybody, you know, or how do you create something that is a communication tool for on a larger scale? It's a very, I mean, I'm not asking for looking for an answer here necessarily. I'm just sort of like struggling with the question myself,
right?
You know, because just how much airspace what's going on now, for example, is taking up, and how complex it is, and how it's diverting our it has to be addressed on the one hand. On the other hand, it's also distracting us from the urgency of the climate crisis.
Yeah. I mean, what's happening in the Ukraine is, I mean, it's basically against everything that Agenda 2030 is. And it's really frustrating, and it's frustrating because you feel like you can't really do that much about it. And
hope nothing.
Yeah, but Dave and I were talking before this about how, interestingly now, for example, in Switzerland, you know, the government is now like, oh, we really missed in investing more in renewable energy. We should have been doing that, you know, for way longer now. And now we really have to get on board. And, you know, it's kind of like ironic that it needs to something like this to kind of like basically when people are like, okay, this is now affecting me because the you know the gas is more expensive or the oil or whatever, and now they're like, okay, now we need to do something about it, you know, and that's kind of like the crazy thing.
It's funny, you know, when Al Gore did The Inconvenient Truth, I mean, the title was completely appropriate. I mean, that's exactly what it is. We're now faced with really the inconvenient truth because we didn't want to make the shifts at any point. But he said it, you know, what is it, 22 years ago or whatever that was when that came out. And I think the title, people didn't, I think a large part of the audience just didn't really digest what the title meant, you know, and I think now people are kind of revisiting that because I think people understand, you know, are a little bit, they understand a little bit more, you know.
Yeah, I mean, still not everybody.
No, obviously, but it's yeah.
Yeah. I just want to end on one thing. I'm just looking at my notes here. If you could just expand on this, because I found this to be really profound and a really beautiful statement, and it was that all action is emotional. And could you expand on that? Because that's something that I think like any animator can feel. This is
actually right? From the new division.
Yeah, I mean,
that one in.
You snuck it in. But I mean, talk about that, because action, the word action has double meanings here. There's like movement, right? Physical movement in space, which for animators, designers, motion graphic artists, such as yourself, that has a certain energy to it. It has a certain meaning, a certain sense, right? But then action in the global scale, from the geopolitical spectrum or from climate change, climate activism, action means something totally different, right? Or somewhat different. Can you expand on that and like what that means?
Well, I think I mean, it means that you know, you basically need to understand the problem, and you need to sort of, I guess, see yourself in it and sort of like connect on that level. And then, you know, if you understand and if you connect, then you'll act, you know, because you care about, basically.
Yeah. So this is like pathos, you know, like this whole Greek idea of emotion, appealing to emotion. It's something that like I think infographics and data visualization can do, right? It does have like this history of doing it. I mean, the whole history of motion of data visualization is surrounded with these, you know, ideas of conveying emotion and things in other people. And I think in particular, there's this, and we were talking about it before, there's this fine line between how to convey emotion. On the one hand, again, there's these spectrums, right? On the one hand, there's fear and urgency and like a nightmare that we're not waking up from, right? And we're living with that every day. And then on the other spectrum, on the other end of the spectrum, there's like these sort of feel-good things where feel-good design, you know, environmental design projects that everything's going to be great. You know, you just throw away your garbage and, you know, you make sure you recycle and don't use plastic straws and do your part, right? Which I think is also kind of missing the mark, because as I mentioned this in the very first lecture of the series, it isn't necessarily up to us. Like me not using a straw isn't gonna change the fact that we're dependent on Russian oil, or that maybe Europe is dependent on Russian oil, or that oil, when it's burned, is creating harmful chemicals. That's a big system that is beyond any individual to fix. And I feel that there's this danger that a lot of climate related design projects run aground on, which is to sort of put the focus on the individual to fix any of this stuff, as opposed to large states and governments, which actually hold the keys, right? They hold the power, and corporations, which hold the most power, and then the relationships between corporations like agribusiness, oil companies, et cetera. and corporation and governments. That's really where the change happens, not with you, me, and what we do with our garbage. Can you comment on this sort of this line where it's like the individual responsibility versus the responsibility of whole governments to fix this? I know it's a big question, but
yeah, and we probably have great people at our company who could even answer that better than I.
Yeah.
But no, but the way I see it is that, as you say, I mean, obviously the governments and also companies have, you know, should really sort of get their shit together.
Yeah. Right.
And, you know, really sort of act and change their, you know, their sort of system, how they work and what they produce and you know, depending on what they do. But then again, I also think that we as individuals, we need to be on this, even if it's just like, you know, using, I don't know, washing strips in a cardboard box as opposed to buying a big plastic bottle. I think everything, I feel like it, you know, the whole mindset of everybody needs to change. Like, it can't, like, it's also easy to just say, oh, the government and the companies, they should, you know, they should really
that's also easy, right? Yeah,
we're part of the food chain.
Exactly. I think we're all part of it. Like, everybody needs to do their part.
Well, there's also this issue that as consumers, we are a critical part of the economy, which seems to be, I mean, the economy is the thing that moves things, right? And it creates change, often for the worse, but sometimes for the better. As consumers, like, we do have a certain responsibility, a moral responsibility, one could say, to buy sustainable things, to you know, to reduce our waste, you know, all the things that we've been told for the last 30 or 40 years. That is still true. All those things are true. But if we can actually, I feel like consumers can make changes that will affect the market, because you know, businesses will have to respond to the demands of the consumers. So that, I guess, suppose there is like that angle that is a definite, it's a definite mover. It's why some of these big car companies, the electric.
I know, I was just gonna say, if nobody buys a sort of normal car anymore, like a gas car anymore, nobody's gonna produce them.
Yeah, I mean, that's the thing. It's like they have been, from what we're told, they've been outlawed after, I think 2035 is when the United States is going to be, they're no longer allowed to make them. But of course, you know, in the United States, we're all rich, basically. I mean, on a global scale, right? It's really countries that are not so well off that'll be given the gas vehicles. And so there's like these other issues that come into play. But I think you're right. I think that we're moving in the right direction. Some of it's a mixture of like us individuals and with our, you know, what we do with our money and where our priorities are, and then the priorities of governments, which, you know, are in an ideal world, are beholden to their citizens, I guess. I think that's, unfortunately, it's about all the time we have to talk. I'm sad about this, but hopefully we'll be able to talk again. Christina, thank you so much for meeting with us and showing us all the amazing work. You've given us a lot to think about, that's for sure. Robert, did you have any other questions or comments?
Thank you very much. And I know personally the work that you did with the Times was very inspirational for me. So I thank you guys for that.
Thank you.
Yeah, and this is really going to help us a lot in the work we're doing here in this class. So thank you.
Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. It was a pleasure and great to be here.
Yeah. Thank you so much. All right. And what time is it, by the way, in Switzerland right now?
It's 7 p.m.
Okay. Yikes. Okay.
Is it spring? Is it spring yet?
It's actually close. Yeah, I mean, it's spring. It's today it was kind of cold, but it's getting warm.
It's getting.
Yeah. Same here. All right.
I know in New York it goes fast sometimes. It's summer in like 2 weeks.
Well, it's going to be like 72 today. I mean, I'm looking out the window. It's beautiful. So it's happening. It's all happening. All right. Thank you so much, Christina. And
all right.
Have a good weekend. All right. Thank you, everybody.
Bye-bye.
Bye. Thank you. Bye.